let's start the show. This is it, folks. The last episode of my first season, and it's kinda hard to believe that I've almost been working on this project for about 3 years. It seems just like yesterday when 13-year-old me picked up a copy of the official US PlayStation magazine, popped in the demo disc that was attached, and was instantly mesmerized by, of all things, a flight simulator. After running to the local Lackluster Video, which was a 45-minute walk both to and from my apartment at the time, I was essentially forever changed. Going from someone who just played video games for escapism to someone who saw games as a new and powerful art form capable of surpassing television and even film itself. Flash forward to today, and I needed a reason to legitimately cover this PS2 game that is over a decade old. What's that? Bandai Namco are releasing Ace Combat 7 in January 2019? Looks like Christmas has come early. Ladies and gents, it's time to end this season once and for all. Come join me as I finally get to review Ace Combat 5: The Unsung War for the PlayStation 2.
So good to be back.
Ace Combat 5: The Unsung War was released on October 2004 to the PlayStation 2. It was directed by Kazutoki Kono, developed by Project Aces, and published by Namco, who at the time had yet to make a merger with Bandai. Ace Combat 5: The Unsung War takes place 15 years after a previous world conflict. Essentially, a nation used nuclear weapons on their own soil, which in turn horrified the surrounding nations, leading to a ceasefire. Now, there's a lot of in-game history in the Ace Combat franchise, and personally, I don't have the ability to flesh this out without boring you to tears. Just keep up with me. I have faith in you. The Ace Combat universe has an alternate world of different nations, which is very much similar to ours. It's a semi-strange yet realistic take, which, as a result, is dubbed Strange Real by Namco. 15 years of peace has now reawakened the flames of war as conflict between the nations of Osea and Yuktobania ignites, sparking the Circum-Pacific War. You're assigned to a rookie group of Osean pilots stationed at the small base of Sand Island when war is officially declared. Wardog Squadron is originally comprised of 4 key members: the tomboyish and diligent Kei Nagase, callsign Edge, the laid-back rock-and-roll motormouth Alvin H. Davenport, callsign Chopper, the player who takes on the callsign Blaze, and their captain, and the only video game character I have ever had a man crush on, Jack Bartlett, callsign Heartbreak 1. When Captain Bartlett goes missing after his plane gets shot down, the game promptly takes the training wheels off and throws you into the war. As the story unfolds, you're joined by rookie mechanic turned member of the Wardog Squadron, Hans Grimm, callsign Archer, as well as a few allies scattered amongst the world. First thing that I need to say about Ace Combat 5 is the voice acting in this game is amazing. All of the mains and a huge chunk of the supporting and side characters are bringing their utmost A-game to this, and both the English and Japanese cast deserve a round of applause for their effort. Now, there are some minor hiccups since Yuktobania is essentially Russia, and yet a lot of enemy characters are pronouncing their lines without the accent. It's kinda off-putting when you hear a character named Nastasia Vasilievna Obertas and they sound like a slightly older Yukari from Persona 3. Essentially, Prime Minister Nicanor and Awax Okanieba are the only 2 who have the accents in the entire game. Now, the interesting thing about the player character Blaze is while we are indeed a silent protagonist, Project Aces gives the player the ability to show their personality. While it's not as grandiose as tying your personality to player action or even shaping the narrative, you are given the chance to communicate with your wingman and the world around you via directional buttons, which somewhat helps shape your responses while playing the game. Are you a more pure of heart person who's fighting for peace like Nagase? Are you a more cynical loudmouth like Chopper? Or even being stoic and not even competent is somewhat written into the game. Whenever I play as Blaze, I would often imagine that I was saying more than a simple yes or no response. I not only believed that, I also would talk back at the television like I was actually a character in the game. I didn't have a lot of friends back then. Also, there are 2 small mission branches in the game where your response determines which missions you'll do. It's nothing that impacts the story, it's more of a, do you want to focus on air-to-air or air-to-ground combat? The problem with that is that the game makes you choose which missions you want to tackle in the form of Chopper asking if you want to listen to rock and roll. Even though I know it's a pre-scripted response, I felt an affinity with my squad mates and just felt out of character if I deviated from it. How about, if I were to rewrite it, my suggestion to get around that problem is possibly a cutscene talking about the two missions going on and then leaving the choice up to the player. The gameplay of Ace Combat 5 isn't too difficult. After a brief tutorial, you're thrown headfirst into the conflict, which isn't the greatest idea in my mind. Ace Combat 5 has a bit of a learning curve when it comes to combat. It's not as difficult as something like Elite Dangerous, it's more of a mix between knowing the flight controls and making sure you don't waste missiles like you have an unlimited amount. Even when I go a long period without playing the game, I get tempted to treat Ace Combat 5 like an arcade game only to find out I ran out of missiles and have to spend the rest of the mission attempting to shoot down enemy planes in gun range. This of course gets even worse on the harder difficulty levels as the amount of ammo you get to use further decreases. If you manage to have any missiles after the first attempt on the third mission, I tip my cap off to you. Also, it goes without saying that the amount of missiles that is available for each aircraft is so comically large, it's reaching Gurren Lagann levels. You see, Ace Combat 5 The Unsung War is a blending of intense arcade-style flight combat and serious single-player story campaign, walking a fine line from the specific attention to detail it put towards the look and feel of each aircraft to the variety of missions in your path. Almost every mission has a different feel to it, from dogfighting, bombing runs, escort missions, avoiding radar networks, and even conducting an air show was added. That being said, there are times where the balance between story and arcade is very hastily put together. Earlier, I mentioned Mission 03, Narrow Margin, in which the reformed Wardog Squadron must protect aircraft carriers and other ships as they attempt to escape a bombing run and move into open waters. The mission has a brief fade-to-black voiceover and then warps onto a new map. Essentially, they used a fade to black as a transition point to disguise a jump cut, and it came across as very abrupt. Part of me wonders if Namco decided to have a cutscene at that point instead of a fade, that scene would have been smoother. Another way the balance is also incredibly out of whack is with the final mission. You and your squadron are tasked with going up against two enemy formations while also on a time limit before the final boss shows up. If you're playing normally, it's a hard-fought fight in which you'll be wired to the screen. If you instead decide to equip your special weapons such as the XLAA, or another long-ranged weapon that can take care of a lot of bad guys at once, you'll be rewarded by special dialogue in which your squadron looks towards their future and thanks you for making it to the end of the journey. So, to recap, playing the game normally, you get that endorphin-filled rush from dogfighting, but you end up losing a touching scene of camaraderie between your squad mates. Either way, both of these decisions will affect immersion, and not in the way that Namco intended. If there is one thing that can be said about the audio portions of Ace Combat 5 The Unsung War, is that it's essentially flawless. The soundtrack is an amazing collection of balls-to-the-walls rock and roll infused with orchestral reinforcement. It's not just full-on guitars and string sections though. The best songwriters know how to make the music build until letting it loose during the chorus parts. It really can be said that Namco was hitting their stride in the mid-2000s, and a lot of that was a result of composers such as Keiki Kobayashi, Tetsukazu Nakanishi, Hiroshi Okubo, and Junichi Nakatsuru, who helped make Ace Combat 5 soar above other titles that came out that year. Ace Combat 5 The Unsung War's theme song happens to be Blurry by Puddle of Mudd. Ah, Puddle of Mudd. The band for people who like trailer park rock but are too sophisticated for Nickelback. Before you get out the pitchforks. I own 2 albums and also feel like Blurry works really well with the trailer footage. Most likely, it was one of the contributing reasons why I went out to get the game in the first place. You see, oftentimes a game or a movie is a lot like making a souffle. You have to add the ingredients, and if a mistake is made, everything can collapse. A lot of early criticism towards Ace Combat 5 involves the amount of radio chatter in missions. While I do admit that the amount of radio chatter can be intense during some missions, I never really got that sense of it being distracting. If anything, I was immersed in the anti-war themes that were prevalent throughout Ace Combat 5's narrative, with the radio chatter being used to show the chaos and urgency in the world around you since you yourself couldn't see it. The visuals for Ace Combat 5 are kind of a mixed bag with me. I don't really have any issues with cutscenes, as Project Aces really got that cinematic feeling nailed down. My issues, unfortunately, lies with the graphical limitations associated with the PlayStation 2. I don't know if it's a result of running the capture card from the TV to the PC we used, but when we started recording, everything felt a little out of focus. Some missions take place at night, and I'm just gonna say, even when I cranked up the brightness, I could just barely make out what was sky and what was ground. Ace Combat 5 also suffers from size limitations. The planes you're piloting are unnaturally large compared to the size of everything else in the world. Buildings, enemy planes, and even geographical formations are woefully not to scale. It gave me the impression of using a model plane on a Micro Machines playset. Granted, you can make the argument that the PS2 had limitations, but I have played a lot of games on that system, and I feel like there could have been more effort since everyone else was bringing their A game. When you have completed the story campaign, Ace Combat 5 doesn't really offer much in terms of replayability. Outside of the campaign, you have an arcade mode which is essentially, waste as many enemies as possible before the time limit expires. Outside of that, there are a multitude of planes to unlock, with some of them being original creations that are essentially out of science fiction. There are challenge medals for things like beating every mission in a difficulty with an S rank, to shooting down a ridiculously high amount of enemies, as well as the ability to rewatch cutscenes and a music player. If you replay the campaign on a higher difficulty setting, you can unlock enemy aces who can lead to special skins for your planes. If you achieve S rank on all the missions on the hardest difficulty, aces, you can also get a hidden message from the developers. One of the few achievements I'm proud of, but also moderately disappointed that I can't go back and admire that message once you've unlocked it. Now then, this is part of the script I've been dreading, and that's primarily tied to my biases and personal history. I'm trying to avoid turning the show into an editorial and oftentimes want to deliver clear analysis that is fair to the work I'm covering, while also not pulling any punches. Through capturing footage, I had noticed something that left me a little confused. When I do these videos, I normally check a bunch of online sources, from wikis, IMDb, behind the voice actors, etc, etc, etc. But it's still a very difficult subject for me to tackle. So, here goes. When I had beaten the game and the ending credits showed up on my screen, I had a pen and paper at the ready to credit the voice actors who are part of Ace Combat 5. I primarily play the game on English dubbing, so I was casually looking over as the credits mentioned the voice actors, the technicians, and even the producers of the Japanese version. Right under that, it had moved on to the American localization and covered the technicians and producers before jumping to the UK localization, where it also covered the technicians and producers associated with the project. The biggest flaw associated with Ace Combat 5 The Unsung War is that it never credited any of the English voice actors who were associated with the project. For those out of the loop, these aren't just no-name voice actors who stepped into the roles of the characters. These are big-name people who have shaped the future of gaming with their talent and dedication to the craft. People like, for example, Steve Blum as Jack Bartlett, Karen Strausman as Kay Nagase, Eddie Frierson as Alvin H. Davenport, Johnny Youngbosch as Hans Grimm, Crispin Freeman as Hamilton, Matthew Mercer as Jeanette, Bob Pappenbrook as Pops, Wendy Lee as Nastasia Vasilievna Obertas, I am not saying that name again, and featuring narration from Jameson K. Price on top of others who lent their talent to this project with absolutely no credit for their work. I had wanted to figure out why Namco didn't credit their voice actors, so I publicly reached out to them, both on their official website and also on Twitter. When I didn't get a response, I also decided to reach out to the voice actors themselves. Figured that someone would have the answers, you know? I was in communication with Arlene Thornton, who is the talent agent to Steve Blum, Crispin Freeman, and Karen Strausman. She stopped responding to me when I had to send her a link to this series. I guess I'm too low on the totem pole. But I surprisingly did get in contact with Karen Strausman and Jameson K. Price, both of which couldn't tell me about why that decision was made though. Karen Strausman told me that she absolutely loved working on Ace Combat 5, while Jameson K. Price honestly doesn't remember anything about it. One thing of note that Jameson K. Price did in fact tell me though, is that most likely he and all the voice actors had to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, preventing them from speaking critically about their projects. I would assume that there would be a statute of limitations on those, but I wouldn't be able to know unless I asked for a copy of someone's contract. It goes without saying that this is aggravating. To me and to those who just shrug and say it's not really that big a problem that voice actors don't get credited, it's time to talk to you about my history. I got my start in media back in 2006 volunteering at my local TV station. Went to college for journalism in 2009, and after graduating, I worked myself into the ground for about 5 years. Volunteering for some pretty big name companies in the process. While I wasn't getting paid for my years of work, or even a sense that I wasn't more than a disposable cog in the machine, it gave me one thing: the sense that I helped create something that brought joy to other people. Regardless of what your job is in the ladder of media-related positions, you deserve to be credited for your work. If you're not, it sends a clear message. You're not worth our time. You're disposable. You're subhuman who should just be glad we even decided to bring you on this project. I'm incredibly biased in regards to this since I've never gotten paid for my work, but I have witnessed firsthand what it's like to not get credited, and insulting is the tamest word I can use to describe it. If Namco ever decides to contact me, or maybe someone with insider information does, I will make another video. Until that time comes though, I am incredibly disappointed. Which is a tragedy because Ace Combat 5: The Unsung War is my favorite video game. With a stellar story, music, gameplay, and voice acting that makes me forget that I'm playing a game, it's a masterstroke. Sure, it has problems such as the size and scale, lack of other modes outside of campaign, and not crediting people who were a giant part as to why I'm talking about it right now, decades later. To this day, I have beaten the game multiple times and have yet to do a full playthrough that didn't result in me crying. If you're curious about it, apparently Bandai Namco is working on a port for the PS4. From what I've heard, it's not going to be a remaster, and yeah, I'm kind of disappointed. I'm still probably going to buy it, but the idea of Ace Combat 5 with updated graphics and possibly new additions would have been greatly welcomed. So, at the end of this video, I would like to say thank you to everyone for being a part of my first season. The past 3 years have been an incredibly long and hard-fought process, but thanks to my team and sheer force of will, I was finally able to finish what I set out to do. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm SonicMTD, and when history witnesses a great change, Rosgreaves reveals itself. First, as a dark demon. As a demon, it uses its power to rain death upon the land, and then it dies. However, after a period of slumber, Rosgreaves returns, this time as a great hero. Later days.
When the day is done, when the race is won, my life has only just begun. When you're next to me, so much more I can see. There's nowhere that I'd rather be. When I'm away from you, and there's nothing I can do. Do you think the same things too? When the time has come, I don't want you to run. You know that you're the only one. All I need is you, for always and forever. All you need is me. Remember when I said, all we need is love for us to be together. 'Cause you're my number one.
Hey everybody, Matthew Tyler DeLeo, better known as SonicMTD, and thank you so much for catching the season finale of Always Right Reviews, where we covered Ace Combat 5: The Unsung War for the PlayStation 2. This is it, folks. This is the season finale. It has been an incredible journey, and I am incredibly proud to have made it to this point. It goes without saying that I'm going to take a bit of a vacation, but after some time, and maybe a high enough demand, there might be a second season coming. Who knows? But until that time comes, please be sure to like and subscribe this video and leave me a comment in the comments down below. Regardless of what you say, I always give it a good once-over, and who knows, if you got some critiques, it might show up in that future season. But I've said too much already. If you look up here, there is going to be a link that is what YouTube recommends that you watch. And then down here is going to be the entire collection of my first season. So if this is your first episode, I strongly recommend that you take a look at the other 11 ones. But either way, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I'm Matthew Tyler DeLeo, better known as SonicMTD. Arigato gozaimasu, and later days.
Stop me. You can find it. No, this is